We're continuing our reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're on Canto 7, Chapter 13, the behavior of a perfect person. We're now on text number 26. In this human form of life, a man and woman unite for sensual pleasure of sex, but by actual experience we have observed that none of them are happy. Therefore, seeing the contrary results, I have stopped taking part in materialistic activities. The opt-out. Everyone can opt out whenever they wish. Purport. As stated by Prahlad Maharaj, Yanmai tunadi griyameti sukham hituchcham. Man and woman both seeks sexual enjoyment, and when they are united by the ritualistic ceremony of marriage, they are happy for some time. But finally, there is dissension, and thus there are so many cases of separation and divorce. Although every man and woman is actually eager to enjoy life through sexual unity, the result is disunity and distress. Marriage is recommended to give men and women a concession for restricted sex life, which is also recommended in Bhagavad Gita by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Dharma virodo bhuteshu kamosmi. Sex life not against the principles of religion is Krishna. Every living entity is always eager to enjoy sex because materialistic life consists of eating, sleeping, sex, and fear. Life, eating, sleeping, sexual enjoyment, and fear cannot be regulated. But for human society, the plan must be allowed to eat, sleep, and take protection from fear. They must be regulated. The Vedic plan for eating recommends that one take yagya shishta or prasada, food offered to Krishna. Yagna shishta shina santo muchante sarvakilbishai. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food that is offered first for sacrifice. In material life, one commits sinful activities, especially in eating, and because of sinful activities, one is condemned by nature's laws to accept another body, which is imposed as punishment. Sex and eating are essential, and therefore they are offered to human society under Vedic restrictions, so that according to the Vedic injunctions, people may eat, sleep, enjoy sex, be protected from fearful life, and gradually be elevated and liberated from the punishment of material existence. Thus, the Vedic injunctions for marriage offer a concession to human society, the idea being that a man and woman united in a ritualistic marriage ceremony should help one another advance in spiritual life. Unfortunately, especially in this age, men and women unite for unrestricted sexual enjoyment. Thus, they are victimized, being obliged to take rebirth in the forms of animals to fulfill their animalistic propensities. The Vedic injunctions therefore warn, Nayam deho deha bhajan liloke kashtan kama marhate vidibhujamye. One should not enjoy sex life like hogs and eat everything, even to the limit of stool. A human being should eat prasada, offered to the deity, and should enjoy sex life according to the Vedic injunctions. He should engage himself in the business of Krishna consciousness. He should save himself from the fearful condition of material existence, and he should sleep only to recover from fatigue due to working hard. The learned Brahmana said that since everything is misused by fruitive workers, he has retired from all fruitive activities. 27. The actual form of life for the living entities is one of spiritual happiness, which is real happiness. This happiness can be achieved only when one stops all materialistic activities. Material sense enjoyment is simply imagination. Therefore, considering this subject matter, I have ceased from all material activities and am lying down here. Purport. The difference between the philosophy of the Mayavadis and that of the Vaishnavas is explained herein. Both the Mayavadis and Vaishnavas know that in materialistic activities there is no happiness. The Mayavadi philosophers, therefore, adhering to the slogan, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, want to refrain from false materialistic activities. They want to stop all activities and merge in the Supreme Brahman. According to the Vaishnava philosophy, however, if one simply ceases from materialistic activity, one cannot remain inactive for very long, and therefore everyone should engage himself in spiritual activities which will solve the problem of suffering in this material world. It is said, therefore, that although the Mayavadi philosophers strive to refrain from materialistic activities and merge in Brahman, and although they may actually merge in the Brahman existence, for want of activity they fall down again into materialistic activity. Arurya Krishna param param tata patantyata. Thus the so-called renouncer, unable to remain in meditation upon Brahman, returns to materialistic activities by opening hospitals and schools and so on. Therefore, simply cultivating knowledge that materialistic activities cannot give one happiness, and that one should consequently cease from material activity. Therefore, simply cultivating knowledge that materialistic activities cannot give one happiness, and that one should consequently cease from such activities is insufficient. One should cease from materialistic activities and take up spiritual activities. Then the solution to the problem will be achieved. Spiritual activities are activities performed according to the order of Krishna. Anukulyena Krishnanushilanam. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. If one does whatever Krishna says, his activities are not material. For example, when Arjuna fought in response to the order of Krishna, his activities were not material. Fighting for sense gratification is a materialistic activity, but fighting by the order of Krishna is spiritual. By spiritual activities, one becomes eligible to go back home, back to Godhead, and then enjoy blissful life eternally. Here in the material world, everything is but a mental concoction that will never give us real happiness. The practical solution, therefore, is to cease from materialistic activities and engage in spiritual activities. Jagnartat kamano nyatra loko yam karma bandhanaha. If one works for the sake of pleasing the Supreme Lord Yagya or Vishnu, one is in liberated life. If one fails to do so, however, he remains in a life of bondage. 28. In this way, the conditioned soul living within the body forgets his self-interest because he identifies himself with the body. Because the body is material, his natural tendency is to be attracted by the varieties of the material world. Thus the living entity suffers the miseries of material existence. Purport: everyone is trying to be happy because, as explained in the previous verse, Sukham asyatmano rupam sarvin ho paritistanu. When the living entity is in his original spiritual form, he is happy by nature. There is no question of miseries for the spiritual being. As Krishna is always happy, the living entities who are his parts and parcels are also happy by nature. But because of being put within this material world and forgetting their eternal relationship with Krishna, they have forgotten their real nature. Because every one of us is a part of Krishna, we have a very affectionate relationship with him. But because we have forgotten our identities and are considering the body to be the self, we are afflicted by all the troubles of birth, death, old age, and disease. This misconception in materialistic life continues unless and until one comes to understand his relationship with Krishna. The happiness sought by the conditioned soul is certainly only illusion, as explained in the next verse. Just as a deer, because of ignorance, cannot see the water within a well covered by grass, but runs after water elsewhere, the living entity covered by the material body does not see the happiness within himself, but runs after happiness in the material world. Purport: this is an accurate example depicting how the living entity, because of lack of knowledge, runs after happiness outside his own self. When one understands his real identity as a spiritual being, he can understand the supreme spiritual being, Krishna, and the real happiness exchanged between Krishna and oneself. It is very interesting to note how this verse points to the body's growth from the spirit soul. The modern materialistic scientist thinks that life grows from matter, but actually the fact is that matter grows from life. The life, or the spirit soul, is compared herein to water, from which clumps of matter grow in the form of grass. One who is ignorant of scientific knowledge of the spirit soul does not look inside the body to find happiness in the soul. Instead, he goes outside to search for happiness, just as a deer without knowledge of the water beneath the grass goes out to the desert to find water. The Krishna conscious movement is trying to remove the ignorance of misled human beings who are trying to find water outside the jurisdiction of life. Raso Vaisaha, Rasoham apsukonteya. The taste of water is Krishna. To quench one's thirst, one must taste water by association with Krishna. This is the Vedic injunction. 30. The living entity tries to achieve happiness and rid himself of the causes of distress, but because the various bodies of the living entities are under the full control of material nature, all his plans in different bodies, one after another, are ultimately baffled. Purport. Because the materialist is in gross ignorance of how the laws of material nature act upon him as a result of his fruit of activity, he mistakenly plans to enjoy bodily comfort in the human form of life through so-called economic development, through pious activities for elevation to the higher planetary systems, and in many other ways. But factually he becomes a victim of the reactions of his fruit of activities. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is situated as the Supersoul within the cores of the hearts of all living entities. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Sarvasya chaham hridisani vishto matak smitir gyanam apohanam cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. The desires and activities of the living entity, of the living being, are observed by the Supersoul, who is the Upadrashta, the overseer, and who orders material nature to fulfill the various desires of the living being, as clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita 18:61. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridesharjuna tishtati ramayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. The Lord is situated in everyone's heart, and as one desires, the Lord gives one various types of bodies, which are like machines. Riding on such a machine, the living entity wanders throughout the universe under the control of material nature and its modes. Thus the living being is not at all free to act, but is fully under the control of material nature, which is fully under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As soon as a living entity is victimized by material desires to lord it over material nature, he is subjected to the control of material nature, which is supervised by the Supreme Soul. The result is that one again and again makes plans and is baffled. But as foolish as he is, he cannot see the cause of his bafflement. This cause is distinctly stated in Bhagavad Gita. Because one has not surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he must work under the control of material nature and its stringent laws. Daivahi esha gunamayi mama maya dharatyaya. The only means of becoming free from this entanglement is to surrender to the Supreme Lord. In the human form of life, the living entity must accept this instruction from the Supreme Person, Krishna. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam braja. Do not plan to achieve happiness and drive away distress. You will never be successful. Simply surrender unto me. Unfortunately, however, the living entity does not accept the Supreme Lord's clearly stated instructions from Bhagavad Gita, and thus he becomes a perpetual captive of the laws of material nature. Jagnartat kamano nyatra loko yam karma bandhanaha. If one does not act for the satisfaction of Krishna, who is known as Vishnu, or yajna, he must be entangled in the reactions of fruitive activities. These reactions are called papa and punya, sinful and pious. By pious activities one is elevated to the higher planetary systems, and by impious activities one is degraded to lower species of life, in which he is punished by the laws of nature. In the lower species of life there is an evolutionary process, and when the term of the living entity's imprisonment or punishment in the lower species is finished, he is again offered a human form and given a chance to decide for himself which way he should plan. If he again misses the opportunity, he is again put into the cycle of birth and death, going sometimes higher and sometimes lower, turning on the samsara chakra, the wheel of material existence. As a wheel sometimes goes up and sometimes comes down, the stringent laws of material nature make the living entity in material existence sometimes happy and sometimes distressed. How he suffers in the cycle of happiness and distress is described in the next verse.
Text 31. Materialistic activities are always mixed with three kinds of miserable conditions: adhyatmika, adidaivika, and adibhautika. Therefore, even if one achieves some success by performing such activities, what is the benefit of this success? One is still subjected to birth, death, old age, disease, and the reactions of his fruitive activities. Purport. According to the materialistic way of life, if a poor man, after laboring very, very hard, gets some material profit at the end of his life, he is considered a success, even though he again dies while suffering the threefold miseries, adhyatmika, adidaivika, and adibhautika. No one can escape the threefold miseries of materialistic life, namely miseries pertaining to the body and mind, miseries pertaining to the difficulties imposed by society, community, nation, and other living entities, and miseries inflicted upon us by natural disturbances, from earthquakes, famines, droughts, floods, epidemics, and so on, wildfires. If one works very hard, suffering the threefold miseries, and then is successful in getting some small benefit, what is the value of his benefit? Besides that, even if a karmi is successful in accumulating some material wealth, he still cannot enjoy it, for he must die in bereavement. I have even seen a dying man begging a medical attendant to increase his life by 4 years so that he could complete his material plans. Of course, the medical man was unsuccessful in expanding the life of the man, who therefore died in great bereavement. Everyone must die in this way, and after one's mental condition is taken into account by the laws of material nature, he is given another chance to fulfill his desires in a different body. Material plans for material happiness have no value, but under the spell of the illusory energy, we consider them extremely valuable. There were many politicians, social reformers, and philosophers who died very miserably without deriving any practical benefit value from their material plans. Therefore, a sane and sensible man never desires to work hard under the conditions of threefold miseries, only to die in disappointment. Text 32. The Brahmana continued, I am actually seeing how a rich man who is a victim of his senses is very greedy to accumulate wealth and therefore suffers from insomnia due to fear from all sides, despite his wealth and opulence. Purport. Greedy capitalists accumulate wealth under so many miserable conditions, the result being that because they collect money by questionable means, their minds are always agitated. Thus they are unable to sleep at night, and they have to take pills for mental tranquility to invite sleep. And sometimes even the pills are a failure. Consequently, the result of having accumulated money by so much labor is certainly not happiness, but only distress. What is the value of acquiring a comfortable position if one's mind is always disturbed? Narottam Das Thakur has therefore sung, Sangsara Bishanule, Dibani Shahiya Dwale, Judayitana Kainu Upaya. I am suffering from the poisonous effect of material enjoyment, and thus my heart is always burning and is almost on the verge of failure. Heart failure, that is. The result of the greedy capitalist's unnecessary accumulation of wealth is that he must suffer from a blazing fire of anxiety and always be concerned with how to save his money and invest it properly to get more and more. Such a life is certainly not very happy, but because of the spell of the illusory energy, materialistic persons engage in such activities. As far as our Krishna consciousness movement is concerned, we are getting money naturally by the grace of God by selling our literature. This literature is not sold for our sense gratification. To spread the Krishna consciousness movement, we need so many things, and Krishna is therefore supplying us the requisite money to advance this mission. The mission of Krishna is to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, and for this purpose we naturally must have sufficient money. Therefore, according to the advice of Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, we should not give up attachment to money that can spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Srila Rupa Goswami says in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Prapanchakataya buddhya haribandhu bandhu vastunaha mumukshabi parityago vairagyam palgo katyate. When persons eager to achieve liberation renounce things related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thinking them to be material, their renunciation is called incomplete. Money that can help in spreading the Krishna consciousness movement is not a part of the material world, and we should not give it up thinking that it is material. Srila Rupa Goswami advises, Anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjataha nirbandha krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagyam uchyate. When one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to Krishna, one is rightly situated above possessiveness. Money is undoubtedly coming in great quantities, but we should not be attached to this money for sense gratification. Every cent should be spent for spreading the Krishna consciousness movement, not for sense gratification. There is danger for a preacher when he receives great quantities of money, for as soon as he spends even a single cent of the collection for his personal sense gratification, he becomes a fallen victim. The preachers of the Krishna consciousness movement should be extremely careful not to misuse the immense quantities of money needed to spread this movement. Let us not make this money the cause of our distress. It should be used for Krishna, and that will cause our eternal happiness. Money is Lakshmi, or the goddess of fortune, the companion of Narayana. Lakshmi ji must always remain with Narayana, and then there need be no fear of degradation. 33. Those who are considered materially powerful and rich are always full of anxieties because of governmental laws, thieves, rogues, enemies, family members, animals, birds, persons seeking charity, the inevitable time factor, and even their own selves. Thus they are invariably afraid. Purport. The word sasmat, swasmat, means from oneself. Because of attachment for money, the richest person is even afraid of himself. He fears that he may have locked his money in an unsafe manner or may have committed some mistake. Aside from the government and its income tax, and aside from thieves, even a rich man's own relatives are always thinking of how to take advantage of him and take away his money. Sometimes these relatives are described as swajanaka dasyu, which means rogues and thieves in the guise of relatives. Therefore, there is no need to accumulate wealth or unnecessarily endeavor for more and more money. The real purpose of life, the real business of life, is to ask, who am I? And to understand oneself. One should understand the position of the living entity in this material world and understand how to return home, back to Godhead. 34. Those in human, this is the Python speaking, still. Those in human society are intelligent. Those in human society who are intelligent should give up the original cause of lamentation, illusion, fear, anger, attachment, poverty, and unnecessary labor. The original cause of all these is the desire for unnecessary prestige and money. Purport. Here is the difference between Vedic civilization and the modern demoniac civilization. Vedic civilization concerned itself with how to achieve self-realization, and for this purpose one was recommended to have a small income to maintain body and soul together. The society was divided into Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, and the members of this society would limit their endeavors to meeting their minimum demands. The Brahmanas in particular would have no material desires. Because the Kshatriyas had to rule the people, it was necessary for them to have money and prestige. But the Vaishyas were satisfied with agricultural produce and milk from the cow, and if by chance there were excess, trade was allowed. The Shudras were also happy, for they would get food and shelter from the three higher classes. In the demoniac civilization of the present day, however, there is no question of Brahmanas or Kshatriyas. There are only so-called workers and a flourishing mercantile class who have no goal in life. According to Vedic civilization, the ultimate perfection of life is to take sannyas. But at this present moment, people do not know why sannyas is accepted. Because of misunderstanding, they think that one accepts sannyas to escape social responsibilities. But one does not accept sannyas to escape from responsibility to society. Generally, one accepts sannyas at the fourth stage of spiritual life. One begins as a brahmachari and then becomes a grihastha, a vanaprastha, and finally a sannyasi, to take advantage of the duration of one's life by engaging oneself fully in self-realization. Sannyas does not mean begging from door to door to accumulate money for sense gratification. However, because in Kali Yuga, people are more or less prone to sense gratification, immature sannyas is not recommended. Srila Rupa Goswami writes in his Nectar of Instruction, Atyahara priyaschascha prachalpo niyamagraha janasankascha alyamcha shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. One's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. 1. Eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. 2. Over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. 3. Talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. 4. Practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. 5. Associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And 6. Being greedy for mundane achievements. A sannyasi should have an institution meant to preach Krishna consciousness. He need not accumulate money for himself. We recommend that as soon as money accumulates in our Krishna consciousness movement, 50% of it should be invested in printing books and 50% for expenditures, especially in establishing centers all over the world. The managers of the Krishna consciousness movement should be extremely cautious in regard to this point. Otherwise, money will be the cause of lamentation, illusion, fear, anger, material attachment, material poverty, and unnecessary hard work. When I was alone in Vrindavan, I never attempted to construct mats or temples. Rather, I was fully satisfied with the small amount of money I could gather by selling back to Godhead. And thus I would provide for myself and also print the literature. When I went to foreign countries, I lived according to the same principle. But when Europeans and Americans began to give money profusely, I started temples and deity worship. The same principle should still be followed. Whatever money is collected should be spent for Krishna and not a farthing for sense gratification. This is the Bhagavat principle. 35. The bee and the python are two excellent spiritual masters who give us exemplary instructions regarding how to be satisfied by collecting only a little and how to stay in one place and not move. Text 36. Oh, excuse me, I got carried away. I got a little carried away, don't
A question from Loka. We'll take it.
In one of the earlier purports, Prabhupada writes that one should not give up attachment to money that can be used for Krishna consciousness.
Correct.
So I just want to understand the difference between not giving up money that can be used for Krishna consciousness versus not giving up attachment to money that can be used for Krishna consciousness. Because in one case you are not giving up money, but in one case you are also attached to the money. There is attachment to the money. So
The point is, we have a goal to expand the Krishna conscious movement. And to do that, we require resources. And money comes in handy a lot. So when we have that goal, then we're hungry all the time for more money. And we expect it. Because Lord Chaitanya is the greatest capitalist. And he's ready to back anybody who wants to take a risk on taking one of his franchises and expanding it. So, we're attached to depending on Lord Chaitanya to send us money. And also, if he doesn't send it, we're not disappointed either because it's up to him. We're ready to use it at any time. Right?
yes, I guess what I was trying to understand was that normally when somebody attached to something, then they cross certain boundaries because to fulfill the attachment. So what would be a healthy way to be attached to money for Krishna, and what would be an unhealthy way to be attached to
A healthy way is that we stick with dharma in order to get the money that we need. Like we preach, and preaching is the best business. We deviate into selling, soap and a rope, and what other concoctions anybody can come up with, because we need more money. We depend on Krishna by preaching. Like Prabhupada gave the principle. He was in Vrindavan and he preached by doing what his guru said, print books if you ever get money. So he printed what he could, which was a magazine. He sold it, he took the money and he used it, put it back in. And if we stick to that principle, that we're not attached to money for the money's sake. We're attached to money because we can expand the preaching with it. And if we do it by the means that are acceptable, for sadhus, then we won't be disturbed by the whole thing. Like the Prabhupada talked about business. He said you must understand what business means. Business means if you're going to do business, you're doing it so you can put the money back into expanding Krishna consciousness. But he was very careful about even allowing people to go into business, because it's so easy to get mission creep and then get absorbed in and just making money and not have time for preaching.
Thank you.
Just okay, we got a quote here.
May I offer 2 verses to
We
document
recognize
what you just said?
the gentleman from Oroville, California,
Thank you.
which may or may not still be there.
It probably isn't there anymore, so maybe I don't exist, because who cares?
Go right ahead.
The first verse is Anashrita karmapulam karyam karma karotya sasanyasi cha yogi cha naninadnir nachakriya. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life, and he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. So if you light fire and spread Krishna consciousness and use all the energy at your disposal and collect billions of dollars and light a fire that spreads Krishna consciousness, and you're not attached to it for yourself, but for pleasing Krishna and for helping others uplift the world in Prabhupada's mission, then there's no question of there being attachment.
We
I
got
was
to
going
move
to do
on.
another, but that was good.
Got to move on. Please hold it for later. Text number 36. From the bumblebee, I have learned to be unattached to accumulating money, for although money is as good as honey, anyone can kill its owner and take it away. Purport. The honey gathered in the comb is taken away by force. Therefore, one who accumulates money should realize that he may be harassed by the government or by thieves or even killed by enemies. Especially in this age of Kali Yuga, it is said that instead of protecting the money of the citizens, the government itself will take away the money with the force of law. The learned Brahmana had therefore decided that he should not accumulate any money. One should own as much as he immediately needs. There's no need to keep a big balance at hand, although along with the fear that it may be plundered by the government or by thieves. I do not endeavor to get anything, but I am satisfied with whatever is achieved in its own way. I do not get anything. If I do not get anything, I am patient and unagitated like a python, and lie down in this way for many days. Purport. One should learn detachment from the bumblebees, for they collect drops of honey here and there and keep it in their honeycomb. But then someone comes and by force takes all the honey away, leaving the bumblebees with nothing. Therefore, one should learn from the bumblebee not to keep more money than one needs. Similarly, one should learn from the python to stay in one place for many, many days without food and then eat only if something comes in its own way. Thus, the learned Brahmana gave instructions gained from two creatures, namely the bumblebee and the python. That's a good name for like a restaurant or something. You come and sit there and then like, we might wait on you or not. You just 38. Sometimes I eat a very small quantity, and sometimes a great quantity. Sometimes the food is very palatable, and sometimes it is stale. Sometimes prasad is offered with great respect, and sometimes food is given neglectfully. Sometimes I eat during the day, and sometimes at night. Thus I eat whatever is easily available. To cover my body, I use whatever is available, whether it be linen, silk, cotton, bark, or deerskin, according to my destiny, and I am fully satisfied and unagitated. Sometimes I lie on the surface of the earth, sometimes on leaves, grass, or stone, sometimes on a pile of ashes, or sometimes, by the will of others, in a palace on a first-class bed with pillows. It sounds like a Bob Dylan song. Purport. The learned Brahmana's description indicates different types of births, for one lies down according to one's body. Sometimes one takes birth as an animal and sometimes as a king. When he takes birth as an animal, he must lie down on the ground. And when he takes birth as a king or a very rich man, he is allowed to lie in first-class rooms in huge palaces decorated with beds and other furniture. Such facilities are not available, however, at the sweet will of the living entity. Rather, they are available by the supreme will, parichaya, or by the arrangement of Maya, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 1861. Ishvara sarva bhutanam vridasharajana tishtiti brahmayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. We got to get a big banner for football games. Bhagavad Gita 1861. Put it up. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The living entity, according to his material desires, receives different types of bodies, which are nothing but machines offered by material nature, according to the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By the will of the Supreme, one must take different bodies with different means for lying down.
Text 41. O my Lord, Sometimes I bathe myself very nicely, smear sandalwood pulp all over my body, put on a flower garland, and dress in fine garments and ornaments. Then I travel like a king on the back of an elephant, or on a chariot or horse. Sometimes, however, I travel naked like a person haunted by a ghost. Purport, or 42. Different people are of different mentalities. Different people are of different mentalities. Therefore, it is not my business either to praise them or to blaspheme them. I only desire their welfare, hoping that they will agree to become one with the Supersoul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Purport. As soon as one comes to the platform of Bhakti Yoga, one understands fully the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, is the goal of life. Vasudevak Sarvamiti Samahatma Sadurlabhaha. This is the instruction of all the Vedic literature. Vidaischa sarvar ahameva vedya sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja. There's no use in praising someone for material qualifications or blaspheming him for material disqualifications. In the material world, good and bad have no meaning, because if one is good, he may be elevated to a higher planetary system, and if one is bad, he may be degraded to the lower planetary systems. People of different mentalities are sometimes elevated and sometimes degraded. But this is not the goal of life. Rather, the goal of life is to become free from elevation and degradation and take to Krishna consciousness. Therefore, a saintly person does not discriminate between that which is supposedly good and supposedly bad. Rather, he desires for everyone to be happy in Krishna consciousness, which is the ultimate goal of life. 43. The mental concoction of discrimination between good and bad should be accepted as one unit and then invested in the mind, which should then be invested in the false ego. The false ego should be invested in the total material energy. This is the process of fighting false discrimination. Purport. This verse describes how a yogi can become free from material affection. Because of material attraction, a karmi cannot see himself. Jnanis can discriminate between matter and spirit, but the yogis, the best of whom are the bhakti yogis, want to return home back to Godhead. The karmis are completely in illusion. The jnanis are neither in illusion nor in positive knowledge. But the yogis, especially the bhakti yogis, are completely on the spiritual platform, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14:26. Mam chayo yabicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samati jayatan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall down under any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Thus a devotee's position is secure. A devotee is at once elevated to the spiritual platform. Others, such as jnanis and hatha yogis, can only gradually ascend to the spiritual platform by nullifying their material discrimination on the platform of psychology and nullifying the false ego by which one thinks, I am this body, a product of matter. One must merge the false ego into the total material energy and merge the total material energy into the supreme energetic. This is the process of becoming free from material attraction. 44. A learned, thoughtful person must realize that material existence is illusion. This is possible only by self-realization. A self-realized person who has actually seen the truth should retire from all material activities, being situated in self-realization. self-realization. Purport: by an analytical study of the entire constitution of the body, one can surely come to the conclusion that the soul is different from all the body's material constituents, such as earth, water, fire, and air. Thus the difference between the body and soul can be realized by a person who is thoughtful, manishi or muni. After this realization of the individual spirit soul, one can very easily understand the Supreme Spirit soul. If one thus realizes that the individual soul is subordinate to the Supreme Spirit soul, he achieves self-realization. As explained in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there are two souls within the body. The body is called Chetra, and there are two Chetragyas, or occupants of the body, namely the Supersoul, Paramatma, and the individual soul. The Supersoul and the individual soul are like two birds sitting on the same tree, the material body. One bird, the individual, forgetful bird, is eating the fruit of the tree, not caring for the instructions of the other bird, which is only a witness to the activities of the first bird, who is his friend. When the forgetful bird comes to understand the Supreme Friend, who is always with him, and trying to give him guidance in different bodies, he takes shelter at the lotus feet of that Supreme Bird. As explained in the yoga process, dhyana vastita tatkatena manasa pashanti yam yoginaha. When one actually becomes a perfect yogi, by meditation he can see the Supreme Friend and surrender unto him. This is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, or actual life in Krishna consciousness. Text 45. 45, sorry. Prahlad Maharaj, you are certainly a self-realized soul and a devotee of the Supreme Lord. You do not care for public opinion or so-called scriptures. For this reason, I have described to you, without hesitation, the history of my self-realization. Purport: a person who is actually a devotee of Krishna does not care about so-called public opinion. Purport: a person who is actually a devotee of Krishna does not care about so-called public opinion and Vedic or philosophical literatures. Prahlad Maharaj, who was such a devotee, always defied the false instructions of his father and the so-called teachers who were appointed to teach him. Instead, he simply followed the instructions of Narada Muni, his guru, and thus he always remained a stalwart devotee. This is the nature of an intelligent devotee. The Srimad Bhagavatam instructs, Yagyai Sankirtana Prayaya Yajanti Hi Sumedasaha. One who is actually very intelligent must join the Krishna consciousness movement, realizing his own self as an eternal servant of Krishna, and thus practice constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Narada Muni continued, after Prahlad Maharaj, the king of the demons, heard these instructions from the saint, he understood the occupational duties of a perfect person, Paramahamsa. Thus, he duly worshipped the saint, took his permission, and then left for his own home. Purport: as quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Kiba Bipra Kiba Neasi Shudra Kena Noi, Kene Noi, Jai Krishna Tattva Veta Shai Guru Hoy. A guru or spiritual master can be anyone who is well conversant with the science of Krishna. Therefore, although Prahlad Maharaj was a grihastha ruling over the demons, he was a Paramahamsa, the best of human beings, and thus he is our guru. In the list of gurus or authorities, Prahlad Maharaj's name is therefore mentioned. Swayambhura Narada Shambhu Kumara Kapilo Manu Prahlado Janako Bhishmo Balirvaya Sakirvayam. The conclusion is that a Paramahamsa is an exalted devotee, Bhagavat Priya. Such a Paramahamsa may be in any stage of life, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyas, and be equally liberated and exalted. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 7th canto, 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Behavior of a Perfect Person. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I have a meeting at 6:30, and if there's a way we can expedite whatever, cleaning of the room and stuff like that, because I got to start getting on the call at about 25 after. And probably, so thank you very much for coming, everyone. We'll start up again tomorrow at 10:45 a.m. and looking very close to finishing the 6th canto in the next day and a half, 7th canto in the next day and a half. About 180 or something like that. Gaur Premanande Nitai Gaura Hari Bo 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 Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Vanchakavadrushcha Kripasinabhevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Sorry to move things along, but we got to clean the room fast, move the chairs fast.